Benedict Spence, I say welcome once again. I do want to talk to you first, though, about this vote about the grooming gang inquiry. Is this Tories playing party politics for this, or is it Labour playing party politics for this? Or, I don't know, is it just Elon Musk?
It's a bit of all of these things, frankly, because, we can't get away from the fact that actually a lot of this happened on the Tories' watch. It's all very well them now coming out, now that Elon Musk has started talking about it, saying, oh, isn't it disgraceful? But as with so many things with the Conservatives, you can sort of very happily sit there and go, yes, it is disgraceful, and you were in power for how long? And this was known about when? Come on, nobody's taking that seriously. But again...
And the Tories saying, oh, well, but the last inquiry, the J inquiry, didn't really do enough. Well, yeah.
Whose inquiry was that?
Yes, exactly.
But again, Labour sort of, battening down the hatches, whipping MPs not to vote for an inquiry. Keir Starmer coming out and saying that it's being spread by sort of far-right agitators. This is incredibly bad politics. And, to sort of sit there and say to Labour MPs, look, I don't really care how you feel about the rape and abuse and torture and, in some cases, murder of young, vulnerable girls. You're going to vote against looking into this. I mean, just what was going through the mind?
This is the thing. I mean, you can absolutely see the Tories, the memes on social media. This is going to be brought up, the next elections, or the local elections, even in the what they reckon 50-plus towns and cities across the country where people suspect that this is going on a grand scale, and still going on, by the way. It's not something that happened in the past. This isn't like the sort of a care home scandal from the past. This is going on right now as well. It's not a good look. I was in two minds about whether there should be an independent inquiry on the basis that they cost a lot of money, they take an awful lot of time. Are we going to learn anything new? But actually, with the whistleblowers and many of the victims saying they do need one, when you realise how little it has been looked into, you cannot possibly have local inquiries. Also, how can you have 50 towns doing local inquiries? It's local authorities, local police, local bosses who've basically blocked the prosecution of these grooming gangs, these rape gangs in the first place. So, of course, it needs to be someone who's come from outside. But but also, the fact that a 7-year inquiry into all manner of child abuse, including in the church, in care homes, that they spent 10 days on the grooming gangs. That's not an inquiry into grooming gangs.
Of course it's not. And it's happening, it's alleged to have happened on a scale that is unfathomable, I think, to most people. That's what's causing a lot of the anger, is that, it was bad enough when they thought, oh, it might just be 3 or 4 towns in isolation, but 50 potentially? I mean, that's just, it's mind-blowing. And to then sort of say, well, that doesn't necessarily, come on, we have inquiries for all sorts of things. This is child rape.
Yeah, exactly. But also, and it was fascinating yesterday to watch the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. OK, to be fair, he was a Home Office Minister in the last government. So, I mean, again, they've all got, guilt on their hands in terms of failure to get anything done. But these things do fundamentally come down to Prime Ministers getting... These aren't announced by junior ministers. Jess Phillips doesn't decide whether or not there's an inquiry into grooming scandals, and neither does Chris Philp. But the reality is, he stood up in the Parliament yesterday and said it is not far right to say that you want to have a full inquiry of the grooming gang scandal, and he was booed by Labour MPs.
Of course he was.
Again, not a good look.
Of course he was. But
not a good look.
But that's because many Labour MPs fundamentally they take the attitude that community relations in a multicultural society is more important than looking into these things. That's their first and foremost view. And many of them also have very large bodies of constituents in their local constituencies who don't want people to look into this because, of course, they know people who might be implicated in this. Jess Phillips is another very good example of this.
Well,
now a government minister who, very narrow majority at the last general election, was heckled at the hustings.
And she called out, it was men. She called out men heckling her.
She doesn't have the courage.
Which men were they, Jeff? Who was it, and why were they heckling you?
She doesn't have the courage to call a spade because she wants to keep her seat. And that's when we've got to that stage, I'm afraid. And, we had this, of course, with the Gaza vote last year. The suggestion that people were intimidating MPs, but we can't possibly say who that is because that might hurt community tensions. Honestly, when you've got to that stage where elected members of Parliament are saying, oh, I'm scared, but I'm not going to name who it is, but Elon Musk is the bad guy, come on, we're not taking this seriously.
Elon Musk has said some outrageous stuff about Jess Phillips, calling her a rape genocide apologist, and she should be in jail. I mean, it's inaccurate, it's outrageous. I mean, the man has got to get a grip, frankly. I mean, God, I'm getting a load of abuse because I'm criticising Elon Musk for what he said, and it's like, seriously, from a bunch of completely ignorant Americans who haven't got a clue. Apparently, I'm very establishment and have totally been on the side of the grooming gangs all this time. I mean, sod off, frankly. You don't comment on stuff you don't know about. It's a top tip here. But I mean, I have to say, lots of interviews with Jess Phillips from the Beth Rigbys and the Victoria Derbyshires and the usual sort of hand-wringing, oh, a woman Labour MP has faced death threats abuse. Now, look, it is no one should get death threats, no one should face abuse, no one in elected office should ever, or running for elected office should ever be criticised, or, being criticised, they should absolutely be criticised, but threatened and intimidated in any way at all, and there have been arrests made. But again, and she did say, I mean, to her credit, she did say that the few days of madness that she's had is nothing compared to the decades sat in police stations with girls bleeding from a battering they've taken from a grooming gang. So I'll put on my big girl pants and just suck it up. But at the end of the day, the government isn't doing enough. The last government didn't do enough. No government's done enough. And the Tories have been, I think, just as bad over the years. Perhaps not under Kemi Badenoch, perhaps not, and people like Robert Jenrick speaking out, but they've been just as bad over the years, saying, oh, we think there's a bit of a problem, and not actually doing anything about it. At the end of the day, if you're not prosecuting the people who committed these crimes, if you're not prosecuting and holding to account the people who covered up and allowed these crimes to continue, if you're not preventing these crimes from carrying on, I don't really care what you say. I think that this is really emblematic of the lack of seriousness, both in Britain's political class and its media class, that actually what people find really disagreeable is what Elon Musk says. Now, I agree with you, he's sort of overstepped the line, but come on. I can't remember, was it Lewis Goodall who said he's very dangerous or something? Yeah. Yes, the man who runs the world's largest private intercontinental ballistic missile program is dangerous because he says things on Twitter. No, we've got our priorities completely wrong, and it's what he says that matters. He's pointing out a failure of the British state to protect the most vulnerable people. It's he is a loose cannon. He is a complete loose cannon. He really is. However, I mean, again, it did come back into the news because of him. That the announcement on some of the safeguarding measures that Yvette Cooper announced the other night, that wouldn't have happened right now. It really wouldn't have. Exactly. What do you make on the vote today? There, do you think Labour are going to vote against it? Tories are going to. Both sides are going to whip for or against. Who do you think is going to come out of this looking worse, such as the politics matter over and above, which of course it doesn't, the safety of young girls? The government is going to whip its MPs to vote against, and so they will vote against, and they will be the ones that come out looking worse. Because how on earth can you morally sit there and say that your feelings on the abuse of children are secondary to the interests of the government? I'm sorry, no. Yeah. Government exists to uphold laws and to protect your rights and your security. That means national security, it means policing. Yeah. If you're failing to protect the most vulnerable, you have failed as a government. Can we also just, linked to this, people talk about the genocide, another stabbing on the streets of London, on a London bus, a 14-year-old boy stabbed to death on a bus at 2:30 in the afternoon. First day back at school for most kids yesterday in the capital city, and I think around most of the country as well. Stabbed to death. Now, it looks like, looks like it's one of those gang things. It turns out he's a rapper. He raps about knives and guns and, miming the trigger pulling and, another one of the, you can go, it's wrong uns killing wrong uns, broad daylight, on public transport. Absolutely terrifying, I think, for most parents. Certainly they thought, my kid might have been on that bus. Yeah. And, it could have happened, it could have happened to you, get involved in it. But don't worry, of course, because we've got the Met Chief, Sir Mark Rowley, nice at knighthood. Now we've got the London Mayor, who's a police crime commissioner for London, sets the budget, the policing priorities and things. Now Sir Sadiq Khan. Do you think those knighthoods are going to make Britain's streets and public transport safer for our teenagers this year? Absolutely not. I mean, it's probably the closest that any of them are going to get to a bladed weapon, actually, given the circumstances. There's a real lack of sort of hands-on approach to this. I mean, look, I know you and I disagree on the severity of the punishment for this sort of thing, but I don't think it's going to cut through until a knife means life. And I do mean carrying that. And I do mean a couple of young boys will have to go to prison for a very long time for the rest of them to get the message. But they're not scared of prison. They're scared of the other kid with a knife. I'm sorry. They will be when it's their classmates getting dragged off and taken to prison and they suddenly realise what the severity of this is. But it is interesting, isn't it, when the Southport riots, the reaction to that was all about, you have to show, instantly, you've got to be very, very clear with your, by showing, tough crime, tough criminal action, but not when it comes to knife crime. I mean, the number of teenagers killed on Britain's streets, particularly in London. I mean, I have to say, if you picture who you think what the victim looks like, and you picture in your head what you think, we haven't got a suspect yet, who the suspect looks like, You're probably right.
I mean...
I'm just saying it. If you're picturing it, oh, not allowed to say it, but statistically, if you look at the pictures and you make a guess, you'll be right.
The same week that the riots erupted in the aftermath of Southport, there was a running battle between gangs in Southend.
With machetes.
Between groups of boys with machetes. And that's the real sort of juxtaposition in this country. People, can be punished, in many cases rightly, for anger, for in response to an act that happened somewhere. But people can arm themselves and fight in the street on CCTV,
daylight.
and the authorities can go, well, we got choices of what we can go after, and we're going to go after this group, not that one.
Well, there was a Hurty tweet we need to go and attend.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the thing, there is a real sense, and I don't think it's made up in people's heads, that our streets are not safe. Our streets are not safe. They really do not feel safe. There are certainly places where I say to my daughter, I don't want you, even near our... we live in a nice area. Don't walk past that school or,
the King's Road. Ooh. Can't be
do
going
not
down
live
there.
Anywhere near fancy schmancy places like that. Let's talk about the A&E though, because you might think you're safe in hospital. Apparently not, because you won't get treated. We are looking at 2-day waits, 50-hour waits in more than 9 hospitals across the country. We've had emergencies declared, the usual winter crisis declared in more than 12 hospitals. At Liverpool saw the first one we've heard announced. Apparently fewer than most years. Yay, well done, everybody. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has said he's ashamed of how some patients are treated in the NHS. Now, I've got family members, I mentioned before, a family member who had a broken pelvis, was on a corridor for more than corridor trolley for more than 24 hours. He's 6'5". That was not a fun experience. And that was in the middle of the summer, by the way. So, I mean, we go from winter crisis to winter crisis for decades. Now we go from winter crisis to spring crisis, summer crisis, autumn crisis, winter crisis, back again. Now we're told we need to be worried about this new, well, not as new, it's another one of those viruses, HMPV virus. I've got to be honest, I don't have time for another pandemic. I'm busy, I've got stuff to do, I've got places to be, but it's spreading in China, concern there. But people say, oh, there's pictures of these wards in China looking like they're overcrowded. You think, that just looks like my local A&E on a Saturday night. I don't know what the issue is. Should Wes Streeting be ashamed of how some patients are treated? I
mean, of course he should. He's the health secretary, and this is his remit. I wouldn't necessarily say it's his fault. I don't think he's been in place long enough for this to be considered his fault, and this has been growing for a long time.
When will it be his fault?
I think, well, this is the thing. I think give it a year or two, and if there's not been sort of tangible progress, because it's unforgivable that actually every year there is a winter crisis, and, oh, we didn't see this coming, please don't go outside. There's this thing called flu that none of us have ever heard about before, and it really affects old people, and so does the temperature. Who could have possibly foreseen this? The inability to sort of intercept this, and also to make sure that there are enough staff, the inability to spot, oh, this is the time of the year when most people take time off. We might want to try and incentivize people to not take time off.
This is like bank tellers taking lunch breaks between sort of 12 and 2. It's like, no, that's when people, I mean, if you have a bank that's open near you, I mean, probably, I'm thinking 10 years ago now, it's like, when I waitressed, funnily enough, we didn't take our dinner break, between the hours of 6 and 9. Funnily enough, I mean, it's when other people are... But that's the thing. Well, I'm really sorry if you work in healthcare. We're really not sure we want you to be off for a lot of December and January. Yeah, there should be rules about it, actually, that people don't take time off. And as much as people might go, well, that's desperately unfair, I'm sorry, you chose to become a medic, and you chose to become a medic because it's well paid and there's a lot of prestige behind it. There are some trade-offs that come with that. But, on the question of staffing, it will take a bit of time for that to filter through, because this country doesn't actually train enough medics and it doesn't retain enough medics. It's a conscious decision.
Yeah, it's a conscious decision, even though we have more than enough resources and we have more than enough
talent. But don't worry, we're training lots of people from China and India and Nigeria.
We have more Ghanaians working in the NHS than there are Ghanaian medics working in Ghana, because we just think, oh, that's fine, you can just strip mine third world countries because they'll work for less. I'm sure that's a sustainable